The whole apartment carried the scent of rain, clean, damp, and faintly earthy, like the storm outside had wandered in and decided to stay. Late March, in Boston, painted everything in shades of gray, the kind that made the world feel slower, heavier, quieter. Distant, thunder rolled through the city, a deep growl echoing between buildings, while raindrops pattered gently against the windows as if they were knocking to belay in. Inside, the air felt warm and still wrapped around the small space I shared with Ryan, my best friend and roommate for the past 3 years. Our apartment wasn't fancy, just a narrow living room, a kitchen barely wide enough for 1 and 2 small bedrooms, but it was ours, and that had always been enough. I closed the door behind me, shaking water from my umbrella as droplets dotted the scratched wooden floor. The lights were low, shadows drifting softly across the walls. Ryan was stretched out on the couch like it belonged to him, which honestly it kind of did. Normally he'd be sitting up by now, teasing me about being drenched or starting another one of his ridiculous food debates, but tonight felt different. He was quiet. Too quiet. His head rested on a pillow, one arm thrown across his face. Even from a few feet away, I could see the faint pink in his cheeks and the way his dark hair stuck to his forehead. He wasn't just tired, he was clearly sick. "Rough day at the office?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I kicked off my wet shoes. Ryan groaned softly, cracking one eye open. "More like rough day losing a fight with this flu, or whatever it is," he rasped, his voice low and low. He coughed once, winced, and tightened the blanket around his shoulders. "I'm pretty sure I caught something from that client who wouldn't stop sneezing right in my face," Ryan muttered. I smirked as I hung my coat. "On the hook. Sounds like you should start charging extra for hazard pay." He let out a weak laugh that quickly faded into a groan as he sank deeper into the cushions. Ryan was 29, just a year older than me, and usually unstoppable. Late night design sessions, early morning gym runs, endless deadlines. He powered through everything. Seeing him like this, wrapped in a blanket and looking so drained, was strange. Not bad, just different, like catching a glimpse of something I wasn't meant to see. I moved into the kitchen and flicked the kettle on. "Ta?" I asked, already pulling a mug from the cabinet. "Yeah, sure," he mumbled, barely loud enough to hear over the soft hum of the storm outside. Rain streaked down the window above the sink, thin trails racing toward the sill. For a moment I just watched them, letting the tension ease from my shoulders. It had been one of those long days, dealing with clients who didn't know what they wanted, but wanted it done yesterday. Still, coming home to Ryan usually made the world feel a little lighter, except tonight. Something felt off. Not the weather, not the city, but the way my chest tightened. Every time I looked at him, curled up and shivering under that blanket. "You look like you're auditioning for a zombie movie," I said, leaning back against the counter as the kettle began to whistle. Ryan let out a low snort and shifted his arm, glaring at me with both tired eyes. "Thanks, Noah. Real supportive." His tone was dry, but there was that familiar flicker, the spark I'd seen 100 times before, the one that always pulled me into his orbit. "What are best friends for if not brutal honesty?" I shot back with a grin, pouring hot water over the tiag. Steam curled upward, soft and comforting, wrapping the kitchen in warmth. I told myself this was just another night, just a storm, just Ryan being dramatic about a cold. But as I carried the mug over and set it on the coffee table, he tried to sit up only to slump halfway back down. "Man, I feel like garbage," he mumbled, rubbing his face with one hand. His cheeks were flushed, hair a damp mess, and for the first time he looked small against that oversized couch. Not weak, just human, in a way I wasn't used to seeing. I nudged the mug toward him. "Drink up," I said softly. "You'll live." He tried to smirk, but it came out softer than usual, almost thankful. "You're stuck with me either way," he said, fingers trembling slightly as he raked for the mug. I chuckled and sank into the armchair across from him. "Lucky me." Thunder rumbled again, deeper this time, making the windows tremble. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the storm outside was pressing closer, searching for a way in. I focused on the steady rhythm of the rain, the faint warmth of the tea in there, anything to ignore the strange flutter sitting tight in my chest. He was just sick. I was just helping. That's what friends do, right? But when Ryan lifted the mug and sent me a faint smile over the rim, something told me tonight wasn't going to stay simple. Rain hammered harder against the glass, drowning out the quiet hum of the apartment. The air felt heavier now, charged with something I couldn't quite name. Ryan was still curled up on the couch, hands wrapped around his mug as steam drifted across his face like a thin veil. He'd managed only a few sips, every motion slow and tired, as if the fever had drained the spark out of him. "This is pathetic," he muttered, setting the cup down with a soft clink. "I can barely lift my arms." I raised an eyebrow, leaning back with my arms crossed. "You sure you're not milking this for sympathy?" He shot me a look, half glare, half grin. Pure Ryan, even through the fatigue. "Oh yeah, Noah, totally. I faked a fever just so you'd play nurse," he rasped. I laughed, shaking my head. "If that's your plan, it's failing miserably," I said, nodding toward the blanket slipping off his shoulder. "You look like a burrito that gave up halfway." Ryan snorted and pulled the blanket back up. "Rude. I'm a premium burrito. Thank you very much." He tried to sit up straighter, but a wuss crossed his face as his hand went to his forehead. "Okay, fine. A premium burrito that needs a shower. I feel disgusting." I tilted my head, watching him fight to keep his balance, something warm and uneasy tightening inside me. "You sure you can handle that?" "You look like you'd pass out halfway there," Ryan groaned, flopping back into the cushions. "Don't tempt fate, man. I'm already on thin ice here," Ryan muttered as another roll of thunder shook the walls, making the lights flicker. I stretched my arms over my head with a sigh. "All right, drama queen. Come on, I'll help you. Can't have you passing out and blaming me later." He cracked one eye open, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. "You're actually serious?" "Of course I am," I said, trying to sound casual. "What's a best friend for if not dragging you around when you can't stand in your own?" Ryan's smirk softened into something quieter. "Fair, just don't drop me." I crossed the room and offered him my hand. He took it, fingers cool and unsteady, and I pulled him up carefully. His arm looped across my shoulders, his weight heavier than I expected. Heat radiated through his sweatshirt, seeping into my side. "You're like a walking furnace," I muttered as we shuffled toward the hallway. "Yeah, well, you're stuck with me," he murmured, his head dipping slightly. It wasn't a long walk, just a few steps to the bathroom, but each movement felt slow and deliberate, like the air itself had thickened around us. I nudged the bathroom door open with my foot and flicked on the light. The tiny space was all white tile and chipped paint. As soon as I turned the shower handle, hot water hissed through the pipes and steam began to rise, filling the room with a soft mist. Ryan leaned heavily against the sink, catching his breath. "You good?" I asked, stepping back a little. He nodded, but it was sluggish, uncertain. "Yeah, just give me a sec." His knuckles were pale against the porcelain, and I hesitated. Normally I'd leave him to handle himself. He was stubborn that way, but tonight he looked like he might actually fall over. "Dude, you're not exactly inspiring confidence," I said, crossing my arms. He glanced up, hazel eyes catching the light, and gave a short laugh. "What? You going to stand there and supervise? Make sure I don't drown." I rolled my eyes, though I couldn't hide the grin creeping across my face. "Tempting, but seriously, you need help." He hesitated, then gave Asmal resigned shrug. "Maybe just don't make it weird," I snorted. "Me? Never." Keeping it light, I stepped closer and helped him tug the sweatshirt over his head. He wobbled slightly, steadying himself with a hand against my shoulder, and I focused on the practical stuff, tossing the shirt aside, making sure he didn't stumble. Steam filled the space completely now, softening every edge, wrapping the room in warmth. "Okay," I said, backing toward the door with a teasing grin. "That's where I draw the line. I'm a good friend, just not that good." Ryan laughed. A real one this time, rough but honest. Coward, he teased, already turning toward the shower, one hand steadying, himself on the wall. I lingered for a second, watching the first burst of water strike the tiles, its rhythm blending with the rain outside. Yell if you need me, I said, pulling the door halfway closed. Yeah, came his muffled reply through the steam. Back in the living room, the floor felt cool beneath my socks as I sank into the armchair again. The storm still raged beyond the windows, thunder rolling low and heavy, but the air inside had changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly. It felt like the room was holding its breath. I told myself it was nothing, just me helping out a sick friend. Boot, as the shower ran and thunder echoed across the city, that flutter in my chest returned. This time it was harder to ignore. The steady rush of water filled the apartment, blending, with the rain hammering the glass. I stretched my legs out, staring up at the ceiling as if it could explain why my thoughts refused to settle. The apartment was quiet otherwise, only the storm, the hum of pipes, and the occasional soft thud from the bathroom as Ryan moved around. I'd left the door cracked, half expecting him to yell for help or throw some sarcastic comment my way. But nothing came, not yet. The empty tea mug sat on the coffee table, the last wisp of steam long gone, leaving a faint ring on the wood. I considered making another cup just to keep busy, just to quiet my head. A sudden clap of thunder made me flinch. I glanced toward the hallway. Steam was curling out now, rolling slowly into the living room like a drifting ghost, carrying with it the familiar wood scent of Ryan's shampoo. He'd used the same one since we first moved in, back when we still argued over shelf space and who deserved the bigger bedroom. 3 years of that, of his chaos, his energy, his presence filling every corner of my life. And yet tonight something about it all felt different. Not dramatic, just quietly significant, like a puzzle piece finally sliding into place. The shower shut off with a faint squeak. I straightened in my chair, listening. "You alive in there?" I called, trying to keep my voice casual. There was a pause, then his reply, low and warm through the steam. "Yeah, just give me a sec." I heard the rustle of a towel, the soft thud of feet in tile. Grabbing the spare towel I'd left draped over the armrest, I walked toward the hallway and stopped just outside the bathroom. The door swung open, and there he was, hair dripping. Adewale wrapped loosely around his waist, leaning against the frame like he wasn't entirely sure he'd make it back to the couch. "Wow," I said, tossing him the extra towel. "You look like a drowned rat, Ismailed. But hey, at least you're a clean one." He caught the towel with one hand, smirking as he rubbed it over his hair. "High praise coming from you, Noah," he said, voice still rough but lighter. "I'll take it." His cheeks were still flushed, but the shower had done its job. His eyes looked clearer now, even if every movement seemed like it took more effort than it should. I stepped closer, ready to steady him, but he waved me off with a tired grin. I got it, mostly. He shuffled past me, leaving a faint trail of damp footprints across the hardwood. I followed, grabbing a blanket from the back of the couch and holding it out as he sank into the cushions. "Better?" I asked, draping it over his shoulders. "Yeah," he murmured, pulling it tighter. "Hot water is basically magic." He leaned back, closing his eyes. For a while, the only sounds were the soft rain outside and the slow, even rhythm of his breathing. I perched on the edge of the coffee table, facing him, unsure what to do with my hands. The air still held a trace of steam, softening the edges of everything around us, and that strange flutter in my chest. It came back stronger than before. Then he opened his eyes and looked straight at me. The smirk he usually wore was gone. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice almost lost under the sound of the rain. "You ever think about us as more than this?" My breath caught. For a second, I forgot how to move. It wasn't dramatic, just an honest question that hung in the air, delicate and dangerous all at once. I could have joked it away, turned it into something easy, but his eyes didn't waver. They searched mine, waiting. I started to speak, stopped, then swallowed hard because the truth was I had. Late nights when he'd crash on my floor after a movie marathon. Mornings when he sang off-key while making coffee. Little things that lingered longer than they should have. "Yeah," I said finally, quieter than I meant to. "I've thought about it." His eyebrows lifted slightly, surprise flickering before his expression. Softened. "Good," he said, leaning his head back, "because I have too." Something in my chest tightened, but it wasn't panic this time. It felt like release, like something that had been wound too tight was finally letting go. "You're serious?" I asked. He nodded, still watching me. "Yeah, you mean more to meth than just the guy who makes me tea when I'm falling apart?" He laughed softly, and I couldn't help but smile. "You fall apart a lot," I teased. "True," he said with a chuckle. "Good thing I've got Youthin." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, really looking at him, the damp hair sticking to his forehead, the blanket wrapped around him, that quiet spark in his eyes. "You do," I said. It sounded simple, but it felt like more. Like a promise I hadn't planned to make until it was already out there. He didn't say anything right away, just nodded once, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the glass, steady and calm. The storm still lingered, but inside it felt different, warmer, safer, like maybe this was always where we were meant to end up. And all it took was one rainy night to finally realize it. By morning, the storm had faded to a soft patter against the windows. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, thin stripes cutting across the floor. I woke up in the armchair, neck stiff, pillow half slipped to the ground. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet after everything that happened last night. For a moment, I just sat there blinking at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Everything should have felt different after what he said, after what I said back. But the room looked exactly the same. The coffee table still cluttered with mugs. A blanket half draped over the couch. The faint smell of rain still hanging in the air. I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the couch. Empty. The blanket was folded or something close to it, and Ryan was gone. My stomach twisted, caught between relief and something else I didn't want to name. Maybe he'd crashed in his room, or maybe he was already pretending last night hadn't happened. I wasn't sure which would hurt more. Stretching, I pushed myself up and padded toward the kitchen. My socks barely made a sound on the floor. Then I heard it, the soft clink of a spoon against a mug, the low hiss of the kettle. Ryan stood barefoot on the cold tile, pouring coffee like it was just another morning. "Morning," he said, voice still rough but steadier than it had been the night before. I was wearing an old t-shirt and sweats, hair sticking up in every direction like the night hadn't quite let him go. "Morning?" I echoed, leaning against the counter. He glanced over at me, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You look like you slept in a pretzel," I snorted, running a hand through my hair. "Thanks to you and your couch-hogging skills." He shrugged and slid a mug toward me. Considerate payback for the Tia. The warmth seeped into my hands as I took a sip. For a while, neither of us said anything. It wasn't awkward, just quiet, like the world was still holding its breath. Last night kept replaying in my head. His question, my answer, the space between us that suddenly didn't feel so impossible anymore. I waited for the panic to hit, the overthinking, the thousand what-ifs, but it didn't come. Instead, there was a kind of calm. But maybe I couldn't shake, and it wasn't as terrifying as I thought it would be. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence as he leaned back against the counter, mug in hand. "Where does that leave us?" I looked at him, sunlight catching in his eyes, familiar, but new all at once. I didn't have a perfect answer. "Maybe we didn't need one yet." "Right here," I said, "for now, that's enough." Ryan smiled, small but real, and lifted his mug in a lassie toast. "Right here," he echoed. Outside, the last drops of rain slid down the glass, catching the light like they didn't want to fall. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. "You going to start avoiding me now?" I blinked, caught off guard, and Ryan grinned, that same familiar grin, sharp and teasing. "What?" I said, setting my mug down. He shrugged, swirling his coffee. "You know the whole? Oh no, we talked about feelings. Better hide forever thing. I know how your brain works, Noah." I rolled my eyes, but he wasn't wrong. My thoughts were already spinning, wondering if this changed everything. If things would get weird now. If people at work or my family would ever understand. Not that I'd told them anything yet. "It's not like that," I said, crossing my arms. "I'm not avoiding you. I'm standing right here, aren't I?" He tilted his head, studying me. "True, but you've got that look like you're about to bolt or start writing a pros and cons list in your head." I couldn't help but laugh because, yeah, that sounded like me. Maybe I am. "Pro, you make decent coffee. Con, you're a nightmare when you're sick." Ryan laughed loud and real, and the sound broke through the tightness in my chest like sunlight after rain. "Fair," he said with a grin. "I'll take it." The kettle clicked off and he turned to pour himself more coffee. His movements were slow. Relax now. I watched him. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was tired. The way his shirt hung loose on his shoulders. He was still Ryan. Still the guy who dragged me out 4 midnight diner runs. Who argued about who'd survive a zombie apocalypse. But now somehow he was more than that. And I didn't quite know what to do with it yet. You feeling better? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, not 100%, but I'll live. Thanks, Toyu, I shrugged, trying to play it off. Just doing my job. He smirked, but his eyes softened when he looked at me. You're good at it, taking care of people. My throat tightened. I looked down at my mug, swirling what was left just to keep my hands busy. Only when they're worth it, I said quietly. When I looked up, he was still watching me. That same warm look from last night lingering in his eyes. Good to know, he murmured. The room felt smaller then. Not heavy, just closer, like we were sharing something that didn't need words anymore. The rain had faded to a faint rhythm against the glass. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth settle the last of my nerves. Maybe it was complicated. Maybe it would take time to figure out. But when Ryan nudged my arm with his elbow and grinned like nothing had changed, I realized maybe it didn't have to be hard. Not yet. Not with him. The days after that rainy night slipped by quietly, the way they always did. But something had shifted, something good. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean, puddles glinting like mirrors under Palasunli. Sunlight. Inside our little apartment, life fell back into rhythm. Ryan's cold faded into a memory, and I was back to my coding deadlines. The laptop glowed the same as always, but it wasn't the same us. Not anymore, really. Now he'd flop onto the couch a little closer than before, his knee brushing mine. He'd catch my eye over breakfast and grin like we were sharing a secret no one else could see. It was a Thursday evening, about a week later, when everything finally clicked. The sun was sinking low, washing the living room in a soft golden haze. Ryan was sprawled across the couch, one leg hanging off the armrest, lazily scrolling through his phone. You up for a walk? He asked without looking up. I glanced over from the kitchen sink where I was rinsing a mug. It's going to rain again, I said, nodding toward the window. Dark clouds were rolling in, and heavy with promise. He just shrugged, tossing his phone aside. So we've got umbrellas. Live a little, Noah, Ismerked, drying my hands on a towel. Says the guy who was a blanket burrito a week ago. He laughed, sitting up. Exactly. I've earned this. Come on, I need air. There it was again, that spark in his eyes. The one that always pulled me along whether I wanted to or not. Fine, I said, grabbing my jacket. But if I get sick, you're making the tea this time. Deal, he said, grinning as he slipped on his sneakers. We stepped outside just as the first drops began to fall, soft and scattered, pattering against the pavement. Ryan popped open his umbrella, holding it high enough for both of us, and we walked side by side. The city buzzed quietly around us. Cars splashing through puddles, people ducking into shop doorways, the glow of neon signs shimmering on wet asphalt. See? He said, bumping his shoulder into mine. Not so bad. I rolled my eyes but didn't pull away. His arm brushed against mine, warm, steady, grounding. You're just lucky it's not a downpour yet, I muttered. He chuckled, and the sound blended with the rhythm of the rain. We didn't talk much at first. We just walked down familiar streets, past the deli where we once argued about sandwich orders, past the park where Hebbet me, he could climb a tree in one try and failed miserably. It was easy, like it had always been. But there was something new beneath the quiet, something unspoken, steady, Andriel. I thought about that night, about the question he'd asked and the way I'd answered. I'd spent so long keeping things simple, keeping us safe. But maybe simple wasn't what we were meant for anymore, but now I wondered why I ever thought I had to. You're quiet, he said after a while, glancing at me as we paused under a street light. Raindrops glistened on the umbrella, sliding off in silver streaks. Just thinking, I said, shoving my hands into my pockets.
He tilted his head, curious.
About what? I hesitated, then shrugged. You us? How it feels? Different now. His grin softened like he'd been waiting for me to admit it. Yeah, different's not bad though, right? I met his gaze in steady warm and shook my head. No, not bad at all. The rain picked up, turning into a steady drizzle that pushed us toward a coffee shop down the block. We slipped inside, grabbed a small table by the window, and watched the world outside blur into watercolor. You know, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. I wasn't sure you'd be okay with this, the whole more than friends thing. I raised a brow, sipping mine. What? You thought I'd run screaming. He laughed, leaning back in his chair. Maybe. You're not exactly Mr. James, Iz murked. And you're not exactly subtle, he grinned. Guess we balance each other out. We drifted easily from teasing to quiet laughter, making fun of the barista's messy handwriting on our cups and how the rain outside made everything look like a scene from a movie. It wasn't some big dramatic moment. No declarations, no promises, just us sitting across from each other, laughing softly while the storm tapped against the glass. And somehow that was enough, more than enough. Later, back at the apartment, we stepped out onto the balcony. The rain had slowed to a faint drizzle. Ryan leaned against the railing, coffee still in hand, and Iz stood beside him. Close enough for our shoulders to touch. This is good, he said quietly, almost like he was saying it to himself. Yeah, I murmured, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my chest. Yeah, it is. The city stretched below us, glowing through the wet haze, and I realized I didn't care. Not about work, not about family, not about what anyone else thought. This was ours. That was all that mattered. We stood there in silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching the last of the rain fade into the night. And I knew then we'd figure it out.